come with that. I don't know if that is more or less what you wanted.
Thank you. That's a very helpful introduction to the discussion. Before we proceed to our next panelists, let's hear what those famous South African commentators have said. Madonsela said on this voting judgment yesterday in the Sunday Times, "I see the judgment as narrowing the space for the arrogance that comes with political monopoly. I also see it igniting interest and passion for democracy, leadership, and literacy among young people, knowing that they can make a difference through entering politics as independent candidates if necessary." Our old COSATU General Secretary, Mbazima Shilowa, he then pushes this envelope further and says, then the next thing that will have to be included in the new law is the right of recall, because part of the problem that makes people grumble a lot about the current electoral system is that you have no right to remove a member of parliament that you think does not represent your interests. Not so, says Lawson Naidu, of the Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. He says this is no magic bullet. It's no panacea for accountability. He's a quote from him, he says, "The judgment is not a panacea for boosting accountability and ensuring clean governance." Dumisani Lubisi of City Press, on the other hand, says, "The way the electorate chooses its parliamentary representatives is bound to change." So in real terms, it also means that the community leaders grew up knowing, like Terry, back in the 1980s, those who were really there for communities can now stand to become true representatives of people in the parliament. So let me introduce you to Professor Mcebisi Ndletyana, who has a PhD in political science from our very own Wits University. He's currently Associate Professor of Politics. We claim you, Buti, we claim you. He's currently Associate Professor of UJ. Before joining UJ, Prof. Ndletyana held positions in numerous research institutions, including the HSRC and MISTRA, and taught at SUNY City University of New York, USA. He's the author of multiple academic publications. His latest publication is a book titled Anatomy of the ANC in Power, Insights from Port Elizabeth, 1990 to 2019, HSRC Press, 2020. His next book chronicles the 100-year history of the University of Fort Hare. Wow, we look forward to that, Mcebisi. He's also a board member of the Albert Luthuli Foundation and CASA. He's a regular contributor to both print and electronic media. And he likes to remind us, which I love, that we're not in Westphalia, you know, in a principality somewhere in Europe. We're in South Africa. And by the way, South Africa is also in Africa. So this is one of the things we hold dear about his constant scholarship. To jump to a more general question in Mcebisi, would you say accountability is a meaningful concept in our political landscape?
Well, accountability, yes, it's a principle that we hold quite dearly. It's a principle that our constitution seeks to foster. But I think it's not, we haven't managed to entrench it in our everyday political life. If you look at political parties, for instance, and this is why Judge Madlanga made a very useful distinction, and the Slabbat Commission actually commented on this, because what PR does, the party list, of course, parties nominate their own candidates, but we don't have a way of holding individual candidates responsible, nor can you recall them and all that stuff. However, there was collective accountability to the extent that we get to vote every 5 years. So we hold the party to account. But the main issue of the Slabbat Commission was in the interim, in between elections, how to enforce accountability of the individual leaders. And we don't have that. And what has then happened as a result of that, which was quite terrible, I wrote about this actually in my conversation article on Friday, which was that the party became extremely arrogant, especially for a party that has a commandist culture like the ANC. And the sense that it is a messianic party. So if you voted for the party, it did not matter what the party decided in terms of individual candidates, you had to accept that. So what this ruling does, Darlene, and rather promises to do, because there's oftentimes a big gap between promise and reality, is that it offers to create space for the enforcement of individual accountability. We have direct folks that we are going to elect as independents, and of course, parties are also likely to change quite dramatically, because what you've heard in the past, especially from the largest party, is that you've had a mixed group of people. Most of these candidates were inglorious individuals without any credibility. So what this promises is that because we are going to elect candidates in a constituency ballot, for instance, that parties will try by all means to make sure that they give us their best candidates. So in that way, then it enables us to realize, or to realize the principle of accountability in a much fuller way, including individual accountability.
Colleagues, thank you so much. Darlene, can we just ask you to please look into the camera, because we're losing a lot of the words that you are saying.
You see, this gentleman doesn't mince his words. He's talking there about glorious individuals. So, Terry, let's introduce you and also just ask you to think about, Pierre said this is going to be still a proportional system, but potentially you could have any number of individuals. So let me introduce you and then put my question to you. Terry is from the, Tselane is from the IMSA, the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, a one-stop shop, they call it, for rendering election management services and providing capacity to individuals and institutions that are in the election space. IMSA was established in 2018 by Terry Tselane, who has extensive experience and a proven track record in election management. He served for just under 20 years in the leadership of the Electoral Commission of South Africa. He served for 2 terms of 7 years each as a commissioner, and also as the vice chairperson of the Electoral Commission of South Africa, where he also acted as chairperson for over a year. Prior to being appointed as a commissioner, he had served for 4 years as both the Municipal Electoral Officer of Pretoria, Tshwane Municipality, as well as the Provincial Electoral Officer for Gauteng. Eddie, did you always think you were going to have such an illustrious career in elections? That's a by-the-way question. So imagine you as an MK commando or something. During his career at the Electoral Commission of South Africa, Terry oversaw 4 national and provincial elections, 4 municipal elections, and hundreds of by-elections, making him one of the most experienced election officials in the world. That's truly incredible. This record remains unmatched not only in South Africa, but in many parts of the world. So perhaps you can just have a brief comment on the personal question, but the more general question I wanted to ask in relation to this judgment is, Pierre has indicated that we still have to maintain the integrity of the proportional system, right? Now you'll have these range of individuals coming on board. Somebody commented that wouldn't this be very costly and complex? What do you think are going to be some of the practical implications for our endeavors to bring this into being, and some of the challenges to Parliament as well to make this judgment possible?
Okay, thank you very much, Darlene. By the way, everything that I know, I learned from you when we're still at first. But I wanted to say that I know that there are many people who has heralded this as a new era in electoral democracy. I agree that it's an important judgment, but I don't think that it actually deals with all the issues that people think it will deal with. So what are the implications of this? Firstly, the import of this is that a few things are going to have to change. One is that we've got to create a constituency system. This constituency system has got to be developed at the provincial as well as at a national level. In other words, a structure similar to demarcation board or the demarcation board itself would have to sit down. Can you hear me?
Yeah. We can hear you.
Yes,
Okay.
Go ahead, Terry.
All right. So I'm saying that the import of this is that the starting point is going to be to divide the country into some kind of constituencies. So you've got to get a structure similar to the demarcation board to do that, to perform that task. And the reason why I'm saying that the demarcation board, it is largely because demarcation board already has got the data sets, they've got the experience, and they've got the technical know-how of how to demarcate geographic areas. The only difficulty is that demarcation board is not empowered in law to deal with this kind of an issue. As the name indicates, its responsibility is to demarcate municipal boundaries. So it means there's going to have to be a change in the Demarcation Act in order to allow the demarcation board to be able to have the capacity to do this. And then once this is done, then you've got to also repeal two other acts. We've come to the Electoral Act. So the Electoral Act is the one that really led to this judgment. It is actually going to be the last to be repealed. Other issues that have got to be attended to immediately, it is the information that is contained within what they call Municipal Structures Act, as well as Municipal Systems Act, because both of them have got implications in terms of the kind of the structure that we are going to have. Now, some of the people think that this judgment is going to lead now to individuals being elected as presidents, and I don't think it is going to be possible. The proportional representation part of the system is still very, very strong. The political parties are still very, very strong, and are going to be an integral part of this process. Now, let's take, for instance, the recommendation that was made by Van Slabet in that Slabet Commission report. He suggested, or the Commission suggested, that you should divide the country into 69 constituencies. Now, if you divide the country into 69 constituencies, it means out of 350 to 400 members of the National Assembly, 69 will be coming from the constituencies. Now, assuming that all of them, those who are coming from the constituencies, club together, they would still not be able to make much difference in terms of they would not be able to influence the situation to the extent that the political parties are rendered completely irrelevant. I know that there is also that section that talks about the 100 and 300 members coming from the constituencies in the same report. But I'm saying, if you look again in what is actually happening at the local level, with whatever system that is actually being utilized there, the political parties, in spite of the fact that you still have direct representation through the ward system, they are still very, very dominant in terms of all the wards, all the areas where you are supposed to be having individuals running those wards as independent. Pierre did not agree with me, and then I saw him shaking his head and then disturbed me a little bit.
You are protected, Terry.
Yeah, so essentially what I'm trying to say that is that important as this judgment is, I don't think it is going to make such a major difference in terms of representation in parliament. But secondly, I don't think the political parties will be weakened in any way by the judgment. If anything, like it is already happening in the municipalities, where you have direct representation at the ward level, all the wards, almost 99% of the wards, are still dominated by the political parties. Independents in those areas are very, very few.
Thanks, Terry. Just before we turn to responses from the panelists, Alex says, is the demarcation board able to make decisions without political influence? Sue Bannister says yes, the demarcation board must act without fear of favor or prejudice, but must consult widely. Raj Badal says the judgment is on a narrow point. Maybe we could get some feedback to the viewpoints that Terry has expressed from the other panelists.
Can I
Pierre, would you
start?
like to go first?
Sorry,
Yeah.
for interrupting you, your thought. As I understand it, in principle, I agree with Terry. So 3 to 7 people elected from one constituency, and it would be on a closed list, which would mean if it's still independent candidate cannot stand, because they needed a closed list, because they said one of the principles of an electoral system means it needs to be simplistic, it needs to be easy to work and be understood. So I don't think that can work. It's probably going to be some version of not selected to stand as the party candidate might potentially, maybe optimistic, influence the party in deciding who are the people who are going to be either on the list, or who are the people who are going to be their candidate in the ward. Yeah, but otherwise, I would be very surprised if there are many independent candidates that make it to parliament. Of course, it has no influence on the election of the president. People who say that it will because the same principle applies, no, it can't, because the constitution says how the president must be elected, and a constitutional provision cannot be unconstitutional, so the court cannot declare it unconstitutional. So no, that is the end of the matter. I'll leave it there.
I can't hear you.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, 2 points on the party issue. I think for me, the major beneficiaries of this likely change are voters. I think parties are going to be a lot more considerate about the kind of candidates that they put on their lists. Because now you're not forced to elect this person, you can choose someone else. So there's going to be a lot more responsiveness then to the kind of people that you put forward. Terry is right, and Pierre both right to some degree about the possibility of having a larger number of candidates. Rather, there's limited possibility of that happening. You know, running parties is an extremely tricky thing. Say, for instance, you have a candidate that is contesting at a provincial level, for argument's sake. Provinces are very massive on their own. And, you know, if you need an infrastructure, you need money, you need a whole lot of things. So being an individual doesn't mean that you are contesting as a person, but you need an organizational infrastructure behind you to get these things done. So it's a possibility, but the extent to which it becomes a reality is contestable. But here's the point that I want to raise with Pierre and the commissioner here. I raised this thing earlier. The issue of proportionality, right? If I follow, I mean, Madlanga's argument is that we have to, part of this judgment is to enable citizens to practice their right to hold office. So this judgment creates a mechanism to enable them to do that. Because previously, that holding of office was enabled through parties, right? So he's saying, no, if you choose not to be part of a party, you can do that in your individual capacity. So that's putting primacy on the individual to realize the right to hold office. Then, put that aside, you then have this dual ballot, this proportionality and the constituency system. As an independent, obviously, you won't benefit from the PR ballot, right? You'll only benefit from the constituency ballot, which then means if we continue with this system, if we have a dual ballot, the individual cannot benefit from the PR ballot. It then means that the right to realize, the possibility to realize the right of holding office is limited by the fact that you're not benefiting from the PR ballot. Doesn't that introduce an element of unfairness? Let me just conclude this. Why would the judge put primacy on individuals realizing this right? And the idea is that they realize the right to its fullest extent, right? So how do you then enable full realization of a right and yet still limit the benefit of the PR vote? How is that possible?
I want to respond to that. And by the way, Professor Ndletyana and I have been debating this for quite some time.
Terry, sorry, if I can just interrupt us here, we have quite an important participant that is part of our discussion today. If I can just find her on the chat list, or him. Mandisa, I'm trying to find she's from the New Nation Movement, or he, I'm not sure. Mandisa Masheho, the national coordinator of the New Nation Movement. Bulelani, the organization that litigated the matter as far back as 2014. We recognize your presence here, welcome. And Kamantha, is it possible for us to unmute Mandisa so that we can get some feedback from the national coordinator?
Sure, we can do that.
Okay, is she ready? Are they ready to comment? Okay, welcome, Mandisa.
Thank you.
You need to unmute? Okay, super. Can you begin again? Okay, great stuff. We can hear you now.
Yes, no, thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that we're part of your meeting. Bulelani, obviously as the coordinator of the New Nation movement, should be online. I don't want to speak for him. He'll indicate his presence. We just wanted you to acknowledge our presence and also to make sure that you're aware that obviously we're part of your discussion. Contextually, we are clear that you are discussing this as, I don't know, I would imagine opinion leaders or experts on electoral matters or constitutional matters in the case of Professor de Vos, but and of course Terry Tselane, who obviously has extensive experience in the electoral space, however under the now unconstitutional electoral space, as it were. So if you can just allow us later on, as and when we need to make inputs to do so, we will be grateful and humbled for that opportunity. Thank you so much.
Mandisa, before you go, can you say 1 or 2 sentences about the New Nation movement?
Thanks, Dr. Miller. I'm not sure if Comrade Bulelani is online. If he is, I would rather
Bulelani,
he does.
are you there? Bulelani, are you able to speak now? Okay, let's
All right.
Yeah?
Yes, no, thanks.
Shall we wait?
No, it's fine. I'm imagining he will join at some point. I also struggled, which was part of the reason I got in a little bit late. Struggled with network connectivity, but it's obviously fine now. So the New Nation movement is not a political party. It had to register as part of the legal proceedings as a non-government organization. And of course, in order to organize themselves in some kind of institutional framework so that they could take the matter, through the courts. And of course, the legal team that assisted them and that took the matter to the High Court as well as obviously to the Constitutional Court. And their interest obviously was primarily on the interest that is to reduce the impact of reduced democratic engagement within political parties under the auspices of the proportional representation. But beyond that, the biggest interest was, as activists, was on ensuring greater transparency in government, greater accountability directly to citizens versus the accountability that comes, from individuals that are deployed to critical positions where they can spend our monies without, basically with impunity because of the implications of reporting to constituencies by political parties as opposed to individuals who are actually given positions of authority and positions to govern our finances and resources. And so, but of course, will allow myself to those for now. The biggest issue, direct accountability from citizens to public representatives that are holding executive office and that are responsible for government. And of course, more than anything else, to improve democracy, because under the current system, it's extremely difficult, if not frustrating, to actually improve democratic engagement and to get each and every individual citizen to understand their democratic rights and the implications of all their rights and the implication of not being able to exercise their rights. You would know that obviously we're sitting with clear examples of what happens when citizens do not actually know their rights and don't know how to access them and have no recourse. You'll see it in the results of inequality itself, and in the results, racial inequality, and in the results of gender-based violence, which, by the way, affects primarily Black women and children and young girls. And so collectively, and of course, the eroding of democratic participation, which is emboldened by proportional representation, and also emboldening the reduction of democratic rights of special groupings, especially indigenous peoples, and vulnerable groupings such as people who are disabled, like women, like I said, young people, elderly women and men, where we also have a massive crisis, again, in that space, all as a result of accountability. So I want to leave it at that, and if Bulelani, when he joins us, he can then embellish and add on a little bit more from his side as the coordinator of the movement. Thank you so much.
Well, Mandisa, we wouldn't be sitting here today debating this if it weren't for you and the movement, the New Nation movement. I see Bulelani, are you able to contribute at this point?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Welcome, Bulelani.
Oh, good. Thank you. No, thank you so much, Dr. Tselane. Well, I think for me, Mandisa has covered quite a bit of where we come from. But the truth is, as she has already said, we understand that this conversation is, as much as it's necessary, but it's more of an academic one, really, because the matter now has been given to Parliament, to put together a legislation that is going to be compliant to the Constitution. However, what we believe that this judgment is going to do, we align ourselves a lot with Mcebisi Ndletyana, professor from EPI, that we believe that, the political parties are definitely going to shape up, to a certain degree. And again, I think from us as a New Nation movement, we have always been underdogs here. Many academics that we engage were laughing at us to say, no, you guys are wasting time. So to many of them, it came as a surprise that the Constitutional Court ruled in our favor. And again, we've been mobilizing and engaging the communities, because at the core of our challenge was to say, we are not even wanting individual candidates to stand. We want the voices of the communities and the constituencies to be heard. But those voices of the communities and the constituencies is going to be expressed via representatives that are going to go into Parliament. And someone, I think it was Commissioner Tselane who spoke about, or I think it was, I'm not sure, but about the power to recall. No, it was Mbazima that was noted here. That's one of the frameworks that we want to create, that even as these constituencies and communities mobilize and come and organize themselves and nominate and elect people to represent them, we want to create a system where they can have the power to recall, so that the seat is not of the individual, but it is that of the community and the constituency. So I think for me, let me leave it at that and allow other people.
Okay, before we return to the panelists, allow me to just say that the dominance of political parties in our electoral landscape, of the bigger political parties, sometimes also contributes to a voter apathy, because it becomes a highly predictable form of exercising power. What is fascinating about the impetus for change is, in this particular judgment, is that firstly, it is an impetus that has come from below rather than the traditionally empowered forces of governance. And secondly, also, there's a link to indigeneity, which we haven't seen as strongly. In fact, the thrust for indigeneity has been suppressed quite a bit in our political landscape. So a different interjection that we're seeing, and one that maybe could wake us up a little bit in our political governance and participation. Terry, I interrupted you earlier. Sorry for that, but I thought it was quite important for us. So maybe go back, because Mcebisi had just thrown out a caveat. How do you realize this right with these current limitations that exist? And you were about to respond as well.
Okay, yeah. The first issue that was raised, Professor, it's in relation to Section 19, subsection 3B. In other words, the New Nation movement, together with all other parties that were party to this, wanted to exercise their rights in terms of Section 19.3, subsection 3B, which is basically to stand for office and to be able to be elected and hold office once elected. Now, if at the same time the issue is about having to have a proportional representation, that proportional representation is already there. It is the right that is already enjoyed by the political parties. So if an independent or a group of independents want to exercise their rights in terms of Section 19.3.B, which is to stand for public office and to be elected into office and to be able to hold that office, then in addition to that, if they want to now exercise other rights, they must exercise other rights like all other political parties by forming a political party, a conglomeration of political parties. And I think we already have a system that confirms this, because when the Forum for Service Delivery started, it started as individuals who were contesting the elections as independents, and at a later stage they realized that they are better it's going to be better for them to be able to benefit from the PR representation, and then they registered a political party and thereby gain from there. But as independents, an independent cannot have his cake or her cake and still have it. So you can't have stand as an independent and still want to benefit from a proportional representation. The point that I had asked earlier when we were having informal discussions, it's assuming that that system was possible. You get elected as an independent and then you still benefit also from the PR. It means you must be having people who are going to be occupying that seat. Who are those people who are going to be occupying that seat? Then why don't you form a political party in order to be able to have those people properly representing you, or being able to occupy the seat once you've got sufficient numbers?
Okay, good question posed there. Before I let you come in, Pierre, let's just note the questions from some of our participants. Malusi Mpolwana says, the SACC, among other organizations, has been calling for electoral reform. Why would this judgment not trigger a broad consultative process for other reform measures? So there were a few questions and comments from panelists that said, isn't this beginning of a reform of the electoral process? And in some ways, we have been, there's been a hesitance sometimes to tamper with the process, to challenge the constitution in any way. And perhaps this represents a mind shift where we are willing to say, let's begin to reform this consultative process. That was Malusi. Then Lito said, I think the PR ballot will also, Lito said, what are the implications of the judgment to NCOP and provincial representational list in the National Assembly? And it wasn't Sue, but Michael, I forget his surname. I think it was Mike Sutcliffe. The question, Michael Sutcliffe, yeah. The comment there was, it can be the start, because certainly there have been lots of discussion around the local government system, the role and functions of provinces, etc. But it doesn't have to be. It can be rather a minor irritation which would make the IS's work much more complex and difficult. And let me just give you one more question from our participants. Lynette says, does this new dispensation result in room for individuals entering into alliances with political parties? And is this any different from the DA and EFF coalition that existed in the various municipalities? So maybe Pierre, if you can kick off.
Okay, so I just want to agree with Mr. Tselane that the PR system and the individual vote system are not incompatible, because that is what the Constitution requires. So the court will just say the different provisions of the Constitution must be read as if they are not in conflict. So you have to give the right to somebody to stand, but it is not the right to be treated exactly the same as a political party, because the Constitution also requires PR. It is one of the inevitable consequences of PR that parties are going to benefit from the PR. There's no other way. The very interesting question, which really goes to, I think, some of the difficulties with the reasoning of the Constitutional Court, is the question about the NCOP. On the first question is not difficult. The NCOP is not elected. It is selected by the legislature, the 6 permanent delegates and the 4 non-permanent delegates. So there's not an election, so the section 19 and 18 doesn't apply. But in the unlikely event that the provincial legislature, who makes the selection proportionate to the party representation in the provincial legislature, if there are now several independents, suddenly the Constitution doesn't provide for this, because it says delegates to the NCOP in the second chamber of the National Parliament are actually nominated proportionate to party representation. So that they haven't thought about that. So that's going to, it's very unlikely that any provincial legislature will have any substantial number of independent members. But it is an interesting conundrum that I don't think anybody has thought of. Well, people here have thought of it, but the judges of the Constitutional Court has not.
Mcebisi?
Well, look, I accept what the 2 gentlemen have just said, but I do have a niggling thought in my head which I can't quite overcome, because the judge spoke about, the right of this individual to choose not to associate with the party. If they choose to do so individually, they must do so. I accept that maybe it's an ongoing topic. Let's put it that way. For now, I get what both gentlemen are saying, but the thought lingers nonetheless. On the question of, there was a question about individuals and political parties forming alliances. Yes, you would inevitably have that. For instance, if, say, at a provincial level, a particular party does not have enough votes to elect a premier, for instance, or to form government, you would inevitably have alliances. But what you don't want to have is, there's always been a suspicion in our politics that the Mcebisi's party was kind of a proxy set up by the ANC to steal some votes from the IFP, right? Because IFP voters could not make a huge jump from the IFP to the ANC. So the NFP was a bearable compromise to land at. But once they moved to the NFP, the ANC then kind of form an alliance. So that was a way of breaking the IFP, right? So I don't know how true that is. It might well be some conspiracy. So what you might have, and I fear it doesn't, I hope it doesn't happen, is that you have party-sponsored candidates. They come across as independents, but they are pretty much sponsored by established parties, because parties know that they are repulsive, right? They are not wanted by voters. So let's bring them closer through an independent candidate. But then when it comes to voting, that independent candidate will vote alongside us. So that's the Machiavellian thing I have in my head, because these things do happen. But again, I mean, I keep on going back to the difference between promise and reality. This portends something different, but the scope, the extent of that difference for me is not yet clear. You know, it's not yet clear.
Thanks. Let's go again to the questions and comments from the participants. Raj Padal says, I think the PR ballot will also include individuals, otherwise it will be challenged. A specific question for Terry from Musimoraka. How will this new system make it possible for an individual to become a premier or president? Then Mpo says, Mpo Monsieur, the problem at this stage is that all these key structures are led and populated by ANC cadres, which is some of the points that the panelists have been making, who solely sworn to keep the ANC agenda and interests. They will never allow any process that brings reforms that deal with issues of governance and corruption. Okay, sorry, let me just get some more of the inputs here. Moruti says, the current electoral system is only to benefit political parties which are only serving the party interest and not of citizens. Let there be district and do away with proportional representation. Some of these issues are interesting because they also invoke that old call that happened at the turn of around 1990s for the Constituent Assembly, as well as a more democratic form of parliamentary representation. Then Michael wants Pierre to answer his question that you could define parties to include independence. See Section 15 of the Electoral Commission Act. Lenswe Motobi, is this judgment not a test for the future? Kamantha Governor, we need to start wrapping up. Noted, Kamantha. Nosisa Mukoka, the recent court judgment on the Electoral Act may have far-fetched implications to the concept of proportional representation if we apply it properly. And then, this was a question on behalf of Nkrumah from Walter Sisulu Academy. One major pertinent question which the Constitutional Court ignores is the application of a proportional representation in the context of this judgment. In the event that an independent candidate wins more than 50% of votes, how will government be constituted within the context of proportional representation? And I will give you a chance to do your final wrap-ups, and maybe we can also invite Pulelani as well to make a final input. But I wanted to raise two broader questions because we have spent quite a bit of time on the details of the system, which is important for democratic participation. But more generally, what do you think are the implications for power and governance in this judgment and in the potential reform that it heralds for the electoral system? Secondly, yesterday there was 702 had a talk show with one of our Wits young lecturers, and she was saying, well, this democracy, she's a feminist, and I'm sorry that I couldn't get her name. She was saying that this democracy excludes what Mandisa was mentioning, which is the participation of women and more vulnerable groups. So what kind of majoritarian democracy is this if women are so invisible in the political landscape, except for what Amina Mama would call a few empowered Femocrats? And then lastly, just to say that overall, do you think that this judgment will allow the improvement of the responsiveness of elected representatives? Because I think that has been at the core of some of the political disgruntlement disgruntlement with our electoral system. Could we start with Pierre and then Terry, and we'll give Mcebisi the last word.
Okay, so I am quite pessimistic about the potential of changes to make a big difference to accountability. And the reason is because parties are overbearing in South Africa, and it is not, the brand of the party is very strong, so, and for many other reasons, I'm a little bit skeptical. One thing that is important here about the electoral system that I think people don't, not yet completely to grips with, what is probably going to happen is we're going to import a version of the system that is now at local government level onto the national and provincial level. So the first question to ask is, are councillors accountable? Are they more accountable than MPs? I'll ask you that question. The second thing is that the reason why the list, the proportional list and the independent candidates cannot go together is if there are constituencies for, say, half the MPs, then you stand in a constituency, you get a vote there. The vote who votes for you also vote for a list. The list is either a list for the province or a list for the whole country. So if you put every independent candidate also on the list, it is chaos. Then the list will be as long as the toilet roll. So you cannot have that. Over and above the fact that that is not going to make any difference, because if there are 500 independent candidates on the list, your 3 votes that you get extra, it can't go anywhere. It is like all the votes in a proportional system that are voted for parties that do not make the threshold, they will be discarded. It's a few votes, so it's not so unfair, but that's the end of the story. So, okay, let me leave it there.
Thanks, Pierre. Terry, do you want to come in? And then after that, Bulelani, if you want to also say something before Mcebisi concludes.
Yeah, let me deal firstly with the question of how do you get then the president or an independent to become the president. Section 86, subsection 1, indicates how the president is supposed to be elected. So the president is elected by the National Assembly, by members who serve in the National Assembly. In other words, those who are in the National Assembly will get together and elect one of them as the president. So that's the only way that a person who is an independent can actually become the president. They must be elected, must get the support of all other political parties as well as other independents in order to be able to get a seat. It's going to be a difficult one. Now, I want to deal also with the last question that we had raised in terms of whether this is going to lead to elected representatives being responsive. One critical question that we have not answered, and it's going to be one of the most important ones, it's in relation to the powers, functions, and role of the representatives from constituencies. If those individuals are just going to be the messengers who just coming in when there is a protest to come and say, please, Parliament is dealing with this, don't worry, matters are going to be attended, then it's actually going to be discrediting the whole system again. So I'm more interested to see how that particular question is going to be dealt with. But also remember, as I've indicated before, you are going to have 2 representatives, one representing the province, one representing the national, in the same geographic area. What is going to be the difference in terms of the role of these 2 individuals? And I think it is only through the clarification of that during the principles around the role of the constituency representatives that this matter is going to be dealt with. But if it is not dealt with, then it is going to bring more confusion than any other thing. Because the one who's representing national can say, it's not my responsibility, it's supposed to be dealt with by the person who is dealing with the province. Another one says, no, it's not me, it's actually what councillor who's supposed to be dealing with this, and what councillor says, no, I've got no powers. The powers are with the political parties at the legislature. So the debates must begin to focus on those areas. What are the powers, functions, and role of constituency representatives?
Thanks, Terry. So with the national coordinator of the New Nation Movement, Lani Mkobululani, would you like to say something, Mr. Bulelani? Are you still available?
Darlene, we have Mcebisi.
Okay.
Mcebisi would like to say something.
Fantastic. Thanks, Commander. Mcebisi, Shaya?
Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. I'd like to appreciate some of the interesting points that are coming from the analysts and electoral practitioners. However, I think we must all bear in mind that Parliament has been given 2 years to deal with this issue. And we must also, secondly, not forget that Parliament, or rather our government structures, are established as one, multi-party democracies, but also multi-party democracies that must regularly genuinely consult the public through public participation processes which are established in Parliament and have been applied, or rather implemented over the years, to whatever degree, you know, and to whatever dissatisfaction of citizens, but those mechanisms are. However, our primary objectives, like I had mentioned earlier, are to, and of course, as well as the points that were raised by Bulelani about the fact that, you know, we are not naive, and I believe that it must be understood that we understand how government functions. Many have spent time over the years understanding, studying, and even considering the loopholes, not just government, but in terms of accountability and in terms of transparency frameworks, especially when it comes to financial governance and overall governance framework. So we should not lose sight of the fact that we are what are the goals that we are looking for? 2, we have 2 years to do this in. 3, within those 2 years, it cannot be, as we know, that proportional representation has brought us to the massive socio-economic crises that we are facing today. And of course, that's not to remove blame from the rest of society, which is organized through private business, etc., that have also collectively contributed to the malaise of problems that we have. But what we are saying is that we do not want this process to become a CODESA. We do not want this process to be reduced again to iconification of individuals and to the paternalistic, patriarchal, sort of toxic character that was inherited from the apartheid system and the colonial apartheid system, where men come together in a room dressed in their gray suits, have a meeting, come back and have a press conference and tell us this is the outcome of their negotiation. Everybody must understand, and we are going to put in a lot of work into this as the New Nation Movement. And by the way, not only the New Nation Movement, I've explained, the New Nation Movement is not a political party. Its interests are for the greater good of Black society, who have found themselves, especially Black women, who have found themselves the fringes of this democracy that was supposed to prioritize Black people for beneficiation, and has in fact done the complete opposite, and has encouraged, you know, elitism and the emergence of strong men versus the emergence of strong institutions, something which was raised by Barack Obama not so long ago when he came to South Africa. I think it was for former President Nelson Mandela's funeral. And so the short-sighted tone of our discussions must be discouraged. No one must, you know, take advantage of this situation from a short-sightedness view. Firstly, it must be understood that the litigants who brought this matter to court and those who supported them for their own reasons had central views and objectives and goals in mind that they actually agreed on, and that is why they participated in the litigation. But that their original goals and objectives must never be betrayed. And the only way that those goals and objectives, which by the way came from communities and many, many activists on the ground who operated as independents, and the only way for those noble goals and objectives not to be betrayed and to make sure that they are safeguarded is to do the things that were not done over the last 25 years, but moreover, to understand that genuine community participation and genuine mandates from people, which proportional representation does not allow, by the way, genuine mandates from communities and any other, community formation that is there beyond political parties must be taken into consideration over the period of the next 2 years. I also want to add,
we're over time.
Can I add one last
just quickly
point?
Wrap up? Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity. The last point is that we are going to push for proposals and open extensive engagements across society, across communities, in the process of pushing proposals towards Parliament to make sure that when Parliament starts this process administratively and bureaucratically, that communities and litigants and all interested parties representing citizens of South Africa are not left out, and that this process is not closed off and allows proportional representation representatives who do not account directly to citizens but through their parties, that they are not allowed to ride roughshod over this process and then turn it into something nightmarish that it was not intended to be. Thank you so much for your generosity.
I think the generosity was in order. Thank you, Mandisa, for correcting the gender imbalance on our panel in more ways than one.
Say that, sorry.
Yeah, Mcebisi, before I allow you the quick last word, just to cite and Tabeleng's comment, or his comment, the lack of accountability by legislators has been attributed to them being deployed by parties rather than the communities. So if the independent candidates will coexist with the proportional representation, what are the implications of this to legislators' accountability? Prof.
Parties have been good for democracy. Political parties historically have been incubators of democratic ethos. You get together a group of people who are not related to each other by blood. They are brought together by a common belief on a particular set of values. That's how we transcend primordial identities to build a community, a political community that is founded on civic values, right? So parties have had that benefit, and certainly in this country, to have had parties like the African National Congress has been a blessing. But at the same time, I think what has happened is that these parties have degenerated into cliques and factions. They've become cartel parties, and they've also been overtaken by oligarchs who don't care for individual views. So there's a sense that the parties are at war with the rest of society, doing all antisocial behavior and all sorts of things, quite the opposite of what historical parties have, of what parties have been doing historically. So we are at a point where then, given this conundrum, notwithstanding what the Constitution says, and of course these things are important, but they're not sacred. Societies change. You always have to reflect how you reimagine society in light of changes that are coming up. It is quite important that we empower the rights of citizens over parties, because parties have been overtaken by oligarchs. The democracy does not exist for parties. Parties are a vehicle to enable the rights of citizens. It is the citizens that count, right? The sovereignty of citizens. So to say the Constitution says this, therefore we can't, it's a nice argument, but I think it's something to be debated. I agree with Bishop Mpumlwana, and I respect the colleagues from opinions from Pierre and the Commissioner. But I think this debate must be continued. I think we have to take this as an opportunity to open up the discussion how do you enable citizens to realize the right of holding office to its fullest extent? You might compromise proportionality, I don't know, but the modalities of which still have to be worked and must be worked thoroughly. But the important thing is to assert the right of citizens. The modality of that is yet to be debated. But we cannot say, well, we can't go into that debate because the Constitution says this and that. No. I mean, we are in a society, we have to change society. Society is not divine, it is created by us. Right? So that's my parting shot. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that punchy parting shot. We'll keep you here so in case the panelists still want to punch back on your parting shot. But you have to allow our participants to do this. So to say thank you for such it's so tedious to say thought-provoking, but really for such a different knowledge perspectives that each of you brought to our discussion today. We really appreciate your willingness to participate in Wits School of Governance in our intellectual debates. We promise to keep producing new knowledge and producing wonderful students that can engage with your work and make some kind of impact on our South African polity that is meaningful change. We also say thank you to New Nations Movement for asserting your presence here and sharing what is such a beautiful and interesting intervention in our political narratives today. So we wish your movement every success. And,
thank you.
Thank you.
And to Ms. Kamantha Govender, who keeps this fantastic battery of amazing webinars coming, to her team as well, and so on, our communications manager, Ms. Govender. Thank you for holding our flag high, but we'll try to allow individual expression, not only flags. So thank you everyone for joining us, and good luck. Survive lockdown. Do the COVID.